Savannah pushed open the front door, shoulders slumping with exhaustion after a 12-hour shift at Mill's Diner, only to freeze in the entryway. Her bedroom door, once adorned with photos from her college art show, stood yawning open, its contents nowhere to be seen. Instead, her 15-year-old sister, Chloe, was sprawled on Savannah's own mattress, scrolling through her phone as if she'd simply grown into the space. Boxes of Savannah's neatly folded clothes were shoved against the far wall, their plastic trash bags pressing them into tight, suffocating bundles. On the floor lay the lamp her best friend had given her for graduation, its cord tangled and the shade cracked as though it, too, had been cast aside. Savannah felt her heart drop. Behind her, their mother, Carol, stood with arms crossed, gaze cool and unyielding. "You'll be sleeping in the den until you figure things out," Carol said, voice flat and final, as though assigning her a chore instead of upending her life. Savannah swallowed hard, her throat going dry. Down the hallway, she could hear her father, Michael, flipping through TV channels in the living room, offering not so much as a glance. In that instant, Savannah realized that no amount of late-night freelance design work, extra shifts, or polite requests for help had mattered. The room that once felt like her sanctuary had been stripped away, replaced by a cold declaration that she no longer belonged there. As she lowered her gaze to the air mattress in the den, a thin, deflated promise of temporary shelter, something inside her shifted. She would not stay invisible. She would not be pushed aside. This was the moment that would change everything. Savannah had hoped that returning home after college would mean reconnecting with her family, but instead, she found herself feeling increasingly invisible. Every morning, she squeezed into her favorite denim jacket and headed out for a shift at Miller's Diner, where she wiped down counters, refilled coffee pots, and carefully balanced plates of pancakes and bacon for early customers. She took pride in the work, treating each task as though it were a stepping stone toward a brighter future. After closing time, she returned to their suburban house in Austin, Texas, where she folded laundry, scrubbed pots and pans, and mowed the small lawn, all while her parents and 14-year-old sister, Chloe, went about their own lives as if Savannah might as well not be there. At first, Savannah believed that by keeping busy sending out dozens of job applications each week, taking online design courses, and pitching freelance graphic design projects, she would earn the respect of her parents, Carol and Michael, and demonstrate to Chloe that she was not just wasting space, but with every polite request and quiet effort. The family's response grew colder. Her mother would glance over at her while she was working on the kitchen island and snap, "Savannah, don't just sit there, go find something useful to do." Even when Savannah was hunched over her laptop, drafting cover letters in the dim light, her mother's tone remained sharp, as though Savannah's very presence was an annoyance. Chloe, perched at the breakfast table with her phone, rarely acknowledged Savannah's existence except to roll her eyes. One afternoon, Savannah walked into the laundry room to find Chloe's art supplies scattered among her neatly folded shirts. When Savannah gently asked Chloe not to treat the laundry like a personal art studio, Chloe sneered, "Relax if nobody needs it. Who cares?" That stung deeply. It wasn't just that her clothes were thrown around, it was the certainty that nobody was paying attention to the effort she put in. It was as though her hard work and dedication disappeared into the background noise of their household. At dinner, Savannah often offered to set the table or wash the dishes afterward, but Carol would look up from her pot roast simmering on the stove and give Savannah a curt, "We've got it, honey." Michael, buried in the sports section of the newspaper or tinkering with the remote, barely reacted. Savannah realized that even her small contributions, folding towels, taking out the trash, went unnoticed or were dismissed as if they were trivial chores that any 12-year-old could handle. She remembered how, at college, she had been praised for her graphic design projects. Professors told her she had real talent. Back at home, though, those skills seemed to vanish from everyone's mind. On weekends, when friends from her hometown posted photos of themselves celebrating new jobs or apartment hunts, Savannah felt a hollow ache. She, too, wanted to share her successes, like pitching a logo design to a local coffee shop or completing a freelance project on time, but whenever she spoke up, Carol would answer with a perfunctory, "That's nice," before turning away to scroll through her smartphone. It was as though Savannah were adding noise pollution rather than valuable information. Chloe, overhearing one of these success announcements, smirked at her friends. "She's still living here, applying to jobs. It's cute." Her older sister's confidence and ease of footing in their parents' home made Savannah feel like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. As weeks passed, Savannah started to notice her bedroom door, once decorated with graduation photos and handwritten notes left open and unguarded, Her books were shuffled into random boxes. Her desk lamp was used for Chloe's late-night makeup sessions, and her art portfolio lay stuffed in the corner. Each morning, as Savannah slid into her car to drive to the diner, she no longer looked back at the house with hope. She only felt the pang of exclusion. At night, lying on an air mattress in the den, she could hear Chloe's laughter echoing from the upstairs bathroom, where her sister filmed TikTok videos for other teenagers to like and comment on. Every giggle reminded Savannah that her own voice, once strong and self-assured during her senior year art show, had been reduced to static interference in a family that no longer tuned in. Still, Savannah continued sending applications, working late hours, and quietly helping around the house. She refused to lash out or cry. She held on to the belief that one day, her family would see her determination and applaud her. But each passing day made her feel smaller, not only because she had nowhere to call her own, but because the very people who should cherish her seemed oblivious to what she was offering. In the solitude of her car's driver's seat parked outside the diner before dawn, she resolved that if her family wouldn't recognize her worth, she would build something undeniable on her own. Until then, she would keep working, keep applying, and keep folding laundry's silent reminders that she refused to be swept into the shadows. Savannah could feel the change in the air the moment she stepped into her childhood home after closing her shift at Miller's Diner. The Texas sun was settling into dusk, but inside the kitchen, her mother, Carol, was already stirring a pot of chili on the stove, its savory aroma mingling with the hum of the refrigerator. Her father, Michael, sat at the small breakfast table, leafing through the sports section of the local newspaper. 14-year-old Chloe was sprawled on the couch in the living room, scrolling through TikTok videos that echoed faintly down the hallway. Savannah paused in the doorway for a moment, worn out from a 12-hour day at work and 15 hours of juggling freelance graphic design projects. She had hoped that arriving home would feel like a warm welcome, at least for the first few weeks after graduation. But by now, the feeling of being invisible had become all too familiar. "Savannah," Carol called over her shoulder without looking up. "Could you move those empty boxes from the pantry? Please, I need the space for groceries." Savannah forced a smile and crossed the tile floor to the basement pantry, where cardboard boxes once neatly labeling her old college textbooks were stacked haphazardly. But the boxes were no longer labeled with art history, design portfolio, or graduation photos. Instead, Chloe's name was scrawled in pink marker on nearly every box. Even the lamp that Savannah's best friend had given her at graduation had been unceremoniously moved to the front porch, its cord trailing over the welcome mat like an afterthought. As Savannah knelt down to lift the nearest box, the scrape of her knees on the cold tile jarred her out of the half-formed thought that perhaps she could simply slip her belongings into the guest room and blend into the background. She glanced down at the box in her hands. It was stuffed with her favorite cookbooks and several design magazines she had painstakingly collected during college. Chloe must have needed more art supplies or fashion catalogs for her own creations, Savannah thought, masking her frustration. She heard Carol's voice again, speaking to someone outside the kitchen window. Savannah paused to listen, clutching the cookbooks to her chest. "I swear, Mrs. Nguyen," she heard her mother say in a low tone. "Savannah's been coddled too long. She's just that sort of child who expects a pat on the back for everything. We told her to get serious, but she's still over there, just messing around on her laptop, thinking she's an artist." "Gee, Carol," replied Mrs. Nguyen. "A neighbor who had stopped by to borrow sugar? I thought she graduated with honors. Didn't Savannah get a scholarship or something?" "She did," Carol replied, still with that clipped edge to her voice. "But honors degrees don't pay the bills. She's living rent-free, and I can't even count the hours she's done nothing but watch movies and send in a handful of job applications. That's not enough." "You know," Savannah's heart sank. She set the stack of cookbooks on the pantry floor and pressed her lips together. If her mother noticed her standing there. She gave no sign. Mrs. Nguyen didn't say anything further. But Savannah could hear the polite hum of agreement through the screen of the window. Neighbors rarely knew how to respond to such bluntness. Feeling exposed, Savannah ducked around the pantry door and retraced her steps to the hallway, her palms sweaty and her chest tightening. When she emerged into the living room, Chloe was still engrossed in her phone, no doubt watching the same videos she had been watching hours earlier. The room was scattered with Chloe's art supplies, watercolors, brushes, and half-finished canvas sketches of sunsets and abstract shapes. Savannah spotted one of her own design brochures now tacked onto a bulletin board covered in Chloe's collage of glitter and magazine clippings. She remembered this board being her own inspiration wall during her last semester of college. when she'd pulled all-nighters to design a branding package for a local coffee shop. Now, Chloe's images of her favorite pop stars dominated the entire space. "Hey," Savannah said softly, hoping not to startle her sister, "do you mind if I—" Chloe rolled her eyes and barely glanced up. "Relax, it's not like I'm doing anything major. Besides, if nobody even knew whose board it was, why should I care?" Savannah felt the sting of that comment more than any yell or harsh word could have delivered. Chloe was right in this house. Nobody seemed to notice whose things were whose. It was as if her years of sacrifice studying late nights, taking on extra shifts, and quietly contributing to the household meant nothing, to Chloe and to their parents. It was as though Savannah's identity had dissolved as soon as she handed over that design portfolio at graduation. She returned to the kitchen, where Carol was now finishing a phone call. Savannah set the pantry boxes down and headed to the sink to wash the few dishes she'd used at work, a coffee mug and a plate. She scrubbed them carefully, slowly enough to keep her tears from falling, but quickly enough to get out of Carol's line of sight. Did you hear me?" Carol snapped from behind the stove. "We need to talk about how much you're actually doing around here." Savannah paused mid-scrub. "I'm doing everything I can," she replied quietly, "but I'm applying for jobs and helping with chores." "Chores aren't substitutes for income, Savannah," Carol interrupted, turning off the stove. "Your father and I, well, he's been talking to Mrs. Martinez and she said you're just wasting time watching YouTube tutorials on graphic design. Real design work demands clients, deadlines, and numbers," she said. "Not some kid dreaming she can freelance herself out of mom and dad's house." Her mother's words pricked at Savannah's chest like needles. "I have had clients," she managed to say. "I designed a logo for that coffee shop on Main Street. Remember? And that landscaping company hired me for their brochures. I've even sketched cover concepts for local authors." Carol made a dismissive gesture. "Sketches don't pay the mortgage. You need to get a stable job, a 9-to-5 somewhere like your cousin did. You're just being stubborn and lazy." Savannah turned off the faucet, letting the water run as she steadied her breathing. "I'm not lazy," she said through clenched teeth. "I work 70-plus hours a week between the diner and my design projects, and I still cover groceries and utilities. If your freelance design was anything more than a hobby, we wouldn't have to keep reminding you to do more." Carol's tone was like winter wind, cool and cutting. She turned to Michael, who offered Savannah a quick glance, a half-hearted nod, and then returned to his newspaper. He didn't say a word to defend her. That was the moment Savannah realized that the battle wasn't going to get any quieter. The passive-aggressive remarks, the sideways comments to neighbors, and Chloe's dismissive attitude weren't accidental. They were a deliberate message that she wasn't measuring up to anyone's expectations. She put down the dishcloth, took a deep breath, and glanced around the kitchen one last time. The cozy yellow walls, the ceramic rooster salt and pepper shakers on the counter, the humming of the fridge, everything felt like a stage set designed to remind her that she didn't belong. Yet, in that moment, Savannah decided she would not shrink any further. The next morning, she would drive to the public library at 6 a.m., reserve a private room for her portfolio reviews, and print out every professional reference she could find. She would not beg her family to recognize her worth. Instead, she would build something unmistakably hers, something so tangible and undeniable that it would speak louder than any offhand comment or sneer. And as she stood there, watching her mother turn back to that recipe book without another word, Savannah felt a quiet, fierce resolve settle in her heart. She would prove, to herself above all, that she was capable of greatness no matter how many times she was told she'd never be enough. The night Savannah returned home from her late shift at Miller's Diner marked a turning point she would never forget. It was just past 9:00 p.m., and the summer evening air still carried the warmth of the day. Savannah parked her old Chevrolet in the driveway and trudged up the few concrete steps to the front door. Exhausted from standing on her feet for 12 hours and desperately craving a quiet space where she could finally breathe. Instead, the moment she crossed the threshold, a wave of confusion and disbelief washed over her. Her bedroom door was wide open, a sight she would have never anticipated. Savannah's posters, once proudly tacked to the walls showcasing her college art projects and inspirational quotes, were gone. Her desk, where she had spent countless late nights refining her design portfolio, had been entirely removed. Even the lamp her best friend had given her at graduation, a gift she cherished more than anything, was now lying tipped over in the hallway. She walked forward, step by tentative step, until she saw Sophie, her 14-year-old sister, bouncing on Savannah's own mattress as though it belonged to her. The bedsheets were fresh with Chloe's pastel comforter, and all of Savannah's neatly folded clothes were crammed into trash bags, shoved against the far wall. Her familiar, comforting belongings had been reduced to an afterthought, a clear sign that her presence had become unwelcome. Savannah stood rooted to the spot, chest tightening as though her breath had been squeezed out. Her heart pounded so loudly she was certain the walls could hear it. Sophie looked over and smirked, as if boasting about her conquest. "I wanted my own view," Chloe said in that dismissive tone that let Savannah know she was simply collateral damage in a family that no longer had room for her. With a swift flounce, Chloe flopped onto the pillow, wrinkling her nose as if the discomfort should somehow have been someone else's problem. Savannah swallowed a lump in her throat and turned toward the kitchen, where she found her mother, Carol, standing with her arms crossed. Under the harsh fluorescent light that flickered overhead, Carol's expression was stoic, no warmth, no apology, just an icy command. "You'll be sleeping in the den until you figure out your life," she said, her voice devoid of empathy, to Savannah. It sounded like the same tone one might use to tell a teenager to make their bed, a simple statement of fact. Not an admission that this decision would chill Savannah's confidence to its core. She felt as though the floor had dropped beneath her feet. The den was less than half the size of her bedroom, and furnished with a thin futon that flattened under her weight as soon as she sat on it. The room was cluttered with outdated furniture, an old recliner with a torn armrest, a TV from a decade ago, and stacks of magazines her dad never bothered to recycle. The thin blanket Carol tossed to her felt more like a cold afterthought than an act of care. Savannah's voice cracked, but she forced herself to speak calmly. "You didn't even tell me. I've been back for 6 months. This was never meant to be permanent," she said, each word measured and clear. She looked at Carol, searching for a flicker of recognition, some small acknowledgement of the years she invested in her degree, of the part-time shifts she juggled while helping with groceries, of the countless freelance projects she had pursued to save money. But Carol simply raised an eyebrow and replied, "Your sister starts high school next week. She needs her space more than you do. We decided this as a family, and you've been dragging your feet. It's time you acted like an adult." It was not only the decision that pierced her, but the way her mother spoke, as though Savannah had already failed some invisible test. Her father, Michael, sat slouched on the couch, flipping through channels on the television as though nothing out of the ordinary had happened. He looked up for a brief second, offered a small, sympathetic shrug, and then went back to his sports highlight reels. He could have said something, anything, to soften the blow. He could have insisted that she at least keep her original room until she found a new place, but he didn't. And in that moment, Savannah realized that her parents were no longer in her corner. Savannah did not yell or cry. She had learned early on that tears and anger were dismissed as weakness. Instead, she nodded, her face a mask of composure. She walked to the hallway, picked up one of the trash bags filled with her life, and started removing the contents: her favorite jeans, the textbooks she had studied from for her design classes, the framed photos of her college accomplishments. She moved quietly, deliberately, determined not to give her parents the satisfaction of seeing her break, though she felt as though the den floor would swallow her whole. She honored the household rule that her parents had drilled into her: respect the home, respect the rules. So, she carefully packed the remaining trash bags and carried them to the front hall. Standing in that cramped hallway, bare feet pressed against the cool tile, clutching a trash bag that somehow felt heavier than ever, Savannah made a promise to herself. If her family no longer saw her as their daughter, if she had become so easily cast aside, then she would not merely survive. She would thrive. She would become the kind of person they could no longer ignore. That night, Savannah laid on the thin futon, the ceiling fan whirring overhead, trying to steady her racing thoughts. She pictured the high school diploma she had earned with honors and the debt-free degree that waited inside her portfolio. She thought about the freelance design work she had lined up and the part-time wages from the diner moonlight savings that already sat in a separate bank account labeled "My Own Place." With every memory of Vegas evenings in her childhood bedroom, nights spent reading design blogs, cutting and pasting mood boards, dreaming of a life shaped by her own hands, her resolve crystallized. When the first rays of morning light filtered through the den's single window, she rose with a quiet certainty. The room that used to represent a temporary shelter would soon become a mere memory standing between her and her future. By the time she headed to the diner at 6:00 a.m., Savannah had drafted a plan in her mind. She would devote every extra hour to building her own life, saving every extra dollar and applying to positions that valued her talents. She would not beg for space or validation. Instead, She would quietly claim her worth through her actions. That moment, standing barefoot in the hallway with her life in trash bags, was the impetus for a transformation, her turning point. The door they had slammed in her life became the threshold to her independence, and from that day forward, Savannah knew she would never shrink again to fit into someone else's narrative, in public. She donned her denim jacket, headed into the diner, and greeted customers with a polite smile. But inside, her confidence burned stronger than any rejection she had ever faced. The familiarity of her old home would soon give way to the home she would build, one brick at a time, on her own terms. Savannah still remembers the exact afternoon she noticed the for sale sign leaning against the lawn of the small house next door. She had returned from a long shift at Miller's Diner, her legs aching from standing almost 12 hours, and saw a young couple walking slowly through the overgrown yard beneath the wide oak tree. The peeling white paint on the siding, the sagging porch railing, and the carpet that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 1980s would have intimidated anyone else but to Savannah. It looked like opportunity. She parked her old Ford F-150 in the driveway, stepped out, and felt something shift inside her chest. That ramshackle bungalow was all she needed to spark the fire she'd been carrying in silence for months. At 23, Savannah didn't come from wealth. Her savings, around $5,000 set aside from 3 years of college work-study jobs and graduation gifts, were modest. But she'd also tucked away extra tips from every double shift at the diner. She had a separate checking account balance she labeled Next Door Fund, and by now that account held roughly $3,200 more from graphic design freelancing. At first, she thought, I'll just clip a for sale flyer and pin it to my corkboard at home. But when she saw the realtor unlock the front door and step inside for a quick tour, Savannah could feel her pulse speed up. The house was ugly, but she was ready to see beyond the chipped plaster walls. That evening, she brewed herself a cup of coffee from the pot she kept on her countertop. She sat on the stool at her makeshift desk, an old folding table with a single drawer, opened her laptop, and began sketching a simple budget spreadsheet. She listed every dollar she had in savings, every expected tip from this week's shifts, and every unpaid invoice from recent design jobs. Then she added projected expenses, the realtor's fee, closing costs around 3% of the sale price, and the minimum fixed interest rate she'd qualify for, about 5.25% APR on a small home loan. Based on current market numbers, she ran the numbers again, conservatively estimating that if she saved $400 each month from her combined diner paycheck and freelance earnings, she could come up with a 10% down payment on $120,000 home within 9 months. Unlike working extra hours at the diner just to scrape by, this plan felt different. It had structure: cover girl, cover design invoice, deposit $50, $100, whatever she could, straight into Next Door Fund, skip 1 latte a week, pack frozen meals instead of fast food, and drop a little more on rent now to bank more toward that purchase. Her roommates at the small 2-bedroom apartment where she shared rent wouldn't notice an extra $75 a month, but over a year, that added up to $900, enough to keep her momentum going. She closed her laptop and stared at the for sale listing she'd saved in her phone: 0.12 acres. 1 bathroom, 2 bedrooms, a small detached garage, and a backyard that could be tamed into something beautiful. She inhaled, and a determined calm washed over her. The next morning, her alarm buzzed at 5:00 a.m., and instead of rolling over, Savannah drove straight to the bank before her shift. She opened a new money market account and set up an automatic transfer of $200 from each paycheck deposit. That evening, instead of staying out with friends, she sat under the glare of her desk lamp, refining her portfolio, drafting follow-up emails to prospective clients, and brainstorming how she could land one larger contract, maybe a local bakery rebrand or a salon's business cards, even on weekends, when most of her peers were sleeping in. She was already at the diner by 7:00 a.m., working double shifts so she could be home by 3:30 p.m. and head next door to measure the backyard with a tape measure, jot down notes, or simply imagine a lounge chair beneath a new wooden pergola. Every dollar she saved felt like a vote of confidence in herself, and every step toward that beat-up bungalow, measuring windows, peeking under closet shelves, asking the realtor a dozen fine-point questions, felt like reclaiming a piece of her story. This wasn't just about buying property, it was about proving to herself that she could build a home where she belonged. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. The for sale sign would soon be her home sweet home sign, and she was determined to see it happen. Savannah's heart pounded the first time she turned the key in the weathered lock of the little bungalow next door. The house sat on a 1/4-acre lot, its white clapboard siding peeling, the porch steps slanted and creaking beneath her weight, Inside, she found beige carpet with stains that hinted at decades of wear, and walls painted in a faded peach that felt more oppressive than welcoming. But Savannah saw potential where others saw decay. She walked through the two-bedroom layout, each room roughly 12 feet by 12 feet, measuring walls with a metal tape, mentally dividing the square footage and calculating how much paint and flooring she'd need. Her determination turned each uneven step into a challenge to overcome rather than a sign to give up. Within a week of closing, Savannah had spent mornings after her shifts scraping old paint from baseboards and evenings hunched over manuals on electrical wiring. She watched online tutorials on how to replace an outlet, how to splice wires safely, and how to restore old wood floors. By day 3, she had already removed the shag carpet from the living room, revealing scratched maple subflooring beneath. She rented a sander from a local hardware store, $25 for a day, and worked under bright LED shop lights to bring out the grain. With each pass of the sander, the rough surface turned smoother until, beneath her hand, the maple planks gleamed with a light honey tone. She paused often to wipe away sawdust, allowing herself to imagine rugs over the floor rather than permanent cover-ups. As the days blurred into weeks, she painted the living room in a muted shade of dove gray that would complement antique brass fixtures she planned to install. She measured windows each roughly 30 inches by 60 inches to ensure the new curtains she ordered would hang 50 inches long, brushing just above the baseboards. Her evenings were punctuated by small victories the moment she successfully wired a new light fixture without tripping a breaker. The day she finished caulking around the patched-in drywall after fixing a crack near the ceiling. Even her chores at Miller's Diner felt like fuel for her project. Every extra shift meant an additional $50 to $80 deposited into her next-door fund, earmarked for materials and tools. Once the interior felt close to welcoming a crisp coat of white on the trim, a new stainless steel sink in the kitchen, pale blue ceramic subway tiles grouted neatly above the counter, Savannah turned her attention to the backyard. The plot sloped gently toward the southeast corner, and around 15 feet from the house stood an old, leaning oak tree whose branches had created a patchy shade. Savannah imagined that area as the perfect spot for a small, in-ground pool, a 3-foot deep, 5-foot wide sun shelf that would let her and one guest soak up warm Texas afternoons. The local contractor she consulted estimated the pool shell would cost around $3.500 plus an additional $1.200 for a pump, filter, and basic plumbing. But Savannah wanted to save every possible dollar, so she negotiated to handle as much of the work herself as she could. After watching videos on pool excavation, she rented a compact excavator, a mini backhoe, for $200 a day. With the rental delivered at 7:00 a.m. to her driveway, she spent that Saturday under the Baton Rouge sun, carefully operating the controls to dig a hole that measured 12 feet long, 8 feet wide, and 4 feet deep. She lined the pit with a layer of crushed limestone about 3 inches thick to provide a stable base, shoveling and raking until the surface felt level underfoot. Once the limestone was compacted using a rented plate compactor, Savannah enlisted a friend to help haul bags of pool shell plaster and tile from the local supply store. They mixed the plaster 1 part cement to 3 parts sand using a portable mortar mixer she borrowed from her uncle. Savannah's hands were gritty and cement-stained by sunset, but seeing the smooth plaster coat on the pool floor and walls filled her with quiet pride. Day by day, she set the blue glass tile trim, each 1 inch by 2 inches, around the pool's waterline, applying thin-set mortar and grouting joints with precision. When it came time to install the pump and filtration system, she followed manufacturer instructions to connect PVC pipes in 1.5-inch diameter, ensuring the skimmer and return lines were sealed with appropriate primer and cement. At dusk, after running the pump for the first time, she watched the water swirl clear. The pool was modest, just a small lagoon-sized oasis, but it was entirely hers. Inside, Savannah finished installing brushed nickel cabinet handles in the bathroom and laid down a cozy area rug that measured 5 by 7 feet. She hung a weathered wooden swing bench purchased from a yard sale for $30 on sturdy hooks anchored into ceiling joists on the shaded front porch. Each detail reflected her vision of comfort, a house remodeled by her own hands. Every fixture and finish a testament to her capability. By the time the pool's LED underwater lights glowed soft turquoise against the evening sky, Savannah sat on the pool's sun shelf with her feet dangling in cool water, the first breeze of the approaching July night ruffling her hair. Through the kitchen window of her childhood home, she imagined Carol and Michael watching, perhaps in quiet disbelief, but Savannah no longer sought their approval. She had learned how to tile, to wire, to plaster, and to plumb, all while covering double shifts and freelancing. Each skill she'd acquired was another affirmation of her self-respect. As cicadas chirped beyond the fence line, Savannah sipped iced tea from a galvanized tin mug 6 inches tall and filled with sweetened brew, and let the satisfaction of building her own sanctuary wash over her. In that sunlit moment, every aching muscle, every long hour, and every penny saved converged into a single truth: she had created a home that belonged to her, no permission needed. Savannah stood in her own kitchen 1 year after moving next door, holding a mug of coffee as the morning sun filtered through the open window. The lavender she had planted just outside bloomed in gentle purples along the fence line, each sprig a reminder of slow, deliberate growth. She thought back to the night her bedroom was taken from her, replaced by her younger sister's belongings, and how her parents had stood back with indifferent shrugs. That moment had felt like an ending, but it became the catalyst for a new beginning. She didn't storm out in anger or demand apologies. Instead, she quietly packed her life into trash bags and resolved to build something undeniable. She worked double shifts at Miller's Diner, saved every extra dollar in a separate account labeled Next Door Fund, and honed her design skills with freelance clients. When she finally purchased the rundown bungalow, she spent restless nights learning how to sand maple floors and wire light fixtures with YouTube tutorials. The small 3-foot deep pool she excavated in her backyard cost less than $5,000 in supplies, but the real value was in knowing she did it herself. Now, Savannah didn't need validation from her mother or approval from her sister. She woke up each morning in a home filled with soft light, a pool glistening in the yard, and a sense of self-respect that couldn't be shaken. She learned that when people show you how little they believe in your worth, you don't beg them to change, you prove yourself right, in the quiet confidence of her own space. She understood that true freedom comes from building a life on your terms, not shrinking to fit someone else's expectations. Life is full of moments that test our resolve, times when the people closest to us may not see our worth. If you've ever felt pushed aside or underestimated, remember that your value doesn't depend on someone else's approval. When Savannah's family took her room away, she didn't pout or chase apologies. She built her dream home, one board and brick at a time. You can do the same. Start small, save a few extra dollars each week, learn a new skill bit by bit, and protect your peace by setting boundaries. No matter your age or circumstance, it's never too late to choose yourself. If today's story resonated with you, please share in the comments which part spoke to your heart the most. And if you want more stories about real people overcoming obstacles with quiet strength, don't forget to subscribe and click the bell so you won't miss our next video. Your journey matters. Let's walk it together.